Hello and welcome along to the latest episode of the Samuel Luckhurst show from the Manchester Evening News. My name is George Smith, and alongside me, of course, is our Chief United writer, Samuel Luckhurst. Samuel, how are you? Did you have a good weekend?
Yep, all good, thank you. Enjoying the cricket. That's the best thing about summers. It's the cricket. I've had my fill of football, and the cricket is shaping up to be it's shaping up to be a cracking crescendo at Headingley. So yeah, it's a pity one has to work today and tomorrow, but duty calls.
It does indeed. But before we dive into today's podcast, of course, we must offer a shout out to our sponsor, which is Saily, which is a brand owned by NordVPN that is a new eSIM service app that you can use abroad if you're in desperate need of an internet connection. You can download Saily in your app store and use code Manchester at checkout to get exclusive 15% off your first purchase. For information, please go to our description box. So with the formalities out of the way, we'll dive into the main event. Samuel, before we came on air, we've just been saying it was a pretty slow weekend news-wise, not a lot going on for us to get our teeth into. But that was up until late on Sunday evening, where a certain Instagram post from Alejandro Garnacho, where he uploaded a handful of images from his holiday. He included one of him wearing an Aston Villa shirt with Marcus Rashford's name and shirt number on the back of it. It's caused quite a stir, as is to be expected. You've done quite a lengthy read on it this morning, quite a powerful piece highlighting why the time has come once and for all for United to get shut of Alejandro Garnacho and Marcus Rashford, who did issue a response to that post saying brother on it, which was quite interesting. I think the game's up for both of them at Old Trafford now, isn't it?
They've shown why Manchester United want to get rid of them because you should not be tolerating that attitude from upstarts really. And it's it's an Instagram post, so normally one would be loath to comment or give an Instagram post the time of day, but of course the context and and the state of play with those two players is relevant in that they're both effectively in the departures lounge. It- there are a lot of things to get into. I mean, Rashford at the weekend said he did some chat with a Spanish influencer. I think it was how they were described, and he said that he wants to play for Barcelona. If he did any of this whilst playing for Barcelona, which I still think is a remote possibility, he wouldn't know what's hit him with Mundo Deportivo and Sport and El Chiringuito and all these channels out there, how histrionically they can react to certain things like that. Now, well, fortunately for coverage in England, there is no El Chiringuito style program to comment on these things, but it is still it was a post that warranted that does warrant comment. The thing that struck me first of all is that Garnacho wearing a Rashford 9 shirt, Rashford 9 Aston Villa shirt, it gives the illusion almost that Rashford was some kind of cult figure at Villa when he scored 4 goals in 17 games. Villa bottled it at Old Trafford on the final day of the season to qualify for the Champions League. They got walloped in the FA Cup semi-final by Crystal Palace, and Rashford wasn't available for those games because he was injured. And on the day that he was out in the FA Cup semi-final, he attended a boxing match in the evening at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Now we're well past the point where Rashford actually cared about the optics of his social life. He showed that when he decided to go to and have a birthday party on Deansgate hours after he was cheered off in a 3-0 derby defeat at Old Trafford. The other thing about it is Rashford's use of the word brother. Now, brother is the most meaningless and hollow word that footballers use, and it has been for a long time, but this is just the most high profile proof of it because they are not mates. Never mind brothers, those two. The only time those two have ever socialized, I guarantee, will have been at team bonding meals. There's no way that those two have gone out. Garnacho wasn't even invited or didn't even attend Rashford's birthday party on Deansgate that time. It was, I think, the only other players who were there were Tyrone Marshall and Aaron Wan-Bissaka. So again, as often as the word brother is used by footballers, they don't look at each other in that way. You know, very few of them would consider each other to be friends. They're normally quite tight knit or very very small groups. It's not like you've got an um, expansive friendship group there. So these two who are now somehow brothers is quite rich also when one of Rashford's inner circle rather angrily informed me that Garnacho was a effing Ronaldo wannabe, and I've still got the email as well. So if they ever want to contest that, I've got it. I've got it in writing. I've got the email address there as well. It is one of his inner circle. It was someone who was actually pictured training with Rashford at the weekend, so that's how tight they are with Rashford. And the notion that these two are somehow this close, there's a close friendship there, is absolutely nonsense for those reasons. I mean, they very rarely linked up on the pitch as teammates. Never mind off it. Garnacho pinched Rashford's place, hence the angry email from one of Rashford's inner circle. So for them to now see each other as allies, I think is quite sad. It's very petty. It does not reflect well on either of them. The two players' advisors have succeeded and failed in that they've built up two players who were lucratively remunerated in 2023 after very good seasons with Manchester United. After those contracts, Garnacho kicked on. It all kicked off with Rashford. And when those two were omitted from the Manchester Derby squad in December, this is what's most disappointing. I think if you're someone who has followed Garnacho's career very closely, is that Garnacho went in one direction after that disappointment, and Rashford went in the polar opposite direction. Rashford decided it's time for a change of scenery. Garnacho fought his way back into the team, and I think he literally played in every remaining match last season. And he was one of a handful of outfield players who didn't get injured last season. So for him to now essentially become this content creating friend of Rashford's, friend I use in very loose terms, is a real shame. It's petty. It's also quite close to home for Manchester United in that these are two academy graduates who represent the best of both worlds. The local lad who had a stratospheric start to his career, and the gem they unearthed from Spain. And that's always been something that United have prided themselves on having at youth level. It's this quite multicultural group, which was particularly the case when they won the Youth Cup in 2022. You had Garnacho, of course, about to become an Argentina international, born in Spain. Marc Jurado, born in Spain. Radek Vitek was the goalkeeper. He's from the Czech Republic. I think Isaac Hansen Aron was also started that night, so a Norwegian. So that's 4 overseas players in the starting 11, when several years ago you'd have just expected a youth team to comprise players from Greater Manchester and maybe one or two just outside Manchester. Of course, in '92, David Beckham was the Londoner in that group. And the Manchester United Academy, they do like to pat themselves on the back a hell of a lot of the time, and with good reason. And they certainly can't be held solely accountable for a player or players disrespecting the club. But the thing that struck me also about that post yesterday was that it reminded me of the time Paul Pogba very publicly and very brazenly revelled in a Manchester United manager's sacking on Twitter. And Paul Pogba is another academy product. In terms of ability, he was world class. Unfortunately, he didn't reach those heights often enough, particularly for Manchester United. But United have had problem players from their academy from frivolous levels, and yesterday was pretty frivolous, to serious levels, which are very well documented. And it is probably time to maybe take stock as well that, okay, they cannot control, they cannot police or parent a player. It's not their sole responsibility. It's the parents' responsibility. It's agents' responsibilities. As I've said before, with Garnacho's advisors, Carlos Cambero and Enrique de Lucas, they've succeeded and failed. They've overseen a player's development into one who was valued in excess of £100 million last year. But they also literally leave him to his own devices. And by that, I mean smartphone devices, where he does some very stupid things, and he continues to do stupid things, and he should have come of age by now, but he hasn't. He acts like he's the finished article, but he's finished at United. So it's a real pity that you've got two players who have done some great things for Manchester United and have come through the academy and given supporters some great moments and some great days, acting in quite a disrespectful manner now. And it's as I said earlier, it's petty, and undermining the manager and undermining the club. It's unbecoming, and that's why United want shot of them, and United are right to want shot of them.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the thing, isn't it? Social media activity in this day and age within a few members of this squad has been more frequent than it should have been in the recent years. We think back to the Jadon Sancho incident when he undermined Eric Ten Hag a couple of years ago, Rashford a couple of times, Garnacho. But I think, Samuel, this is a real opportunity for Ruben Amorim to put a stamp on this and sort of say, if you're going to act like this, you are not welcome in my plans. It's time to go. We've seen that Rashford is one of the three they want to sell as a priority. Garnacho has been told he can leave. This could paint Ruben Amorim in a really good light potentially.
It's in a way it was an easy job for him because everybody. I think this time last year, I even used the phrase "change of scenery" in a piece about Rashford after United rather foolishly decided to keep Ten Hag, because I didn't think that dynamic could ever survive the calendar year, just having those two there, given the issues that had developed between manager and star player, which again was a great shame given Rashford's form in Ten Hag's first season. And it didn't take Amrin long to twig that there were issues with Rashford that still continued and persisted after Ten Hag had gone. And I thought last summer that it was in the interests of all parties for Rashford to go. I just couldn't see a way back for him at United, really, particularly because of his rapport with the supporters. You can have a bad season, but when your body language is as bad as his was last season, and we heard and saw the reactions from supporters towards him, it just felt like it was in his best interests and the club's best interest that he get a move, but it was never foreseeable. And United were also, I think they were treading on eggshells at times with Rashford because of how high profile some of his transgressions had been. Obviously, the Deansgate one in October 2023, the Belfast one in January 2024. And certainly that 23-24 season, I think there was only one piece of team notes where United felt duty bound to give it exaggerated context, if you like, which was Rashford coming out of the team for Anthony away to Chelsea in April 2024, I believe it was. And I think he might have been the only change from the draw at Brentford 5 days earlier on the Saturday night. And United tried to frame it as he's being rested. It's not a demotion, he's being rested. Yet he was the only change in that side. And in fairness, a few days later, Rashford did come back into the team against Liverpool, some probably undeservedly, because Anthony had actually, the only time in his whole United career, probably, he played truly well throughout the whole game away at Chelsea in that 4-3 defeat. So, but the fact that United felt that they needed to contextualise Rashford's demotion to the bench, that was another red flag, and they weren't doing that last season, unsurprisingly, before he went on loan to Aston Villa. Rather amusingly, actually, when in the following game, in the game after the derby, when Garnacho and Rashford had been dropped, I think we had the squad. I think we'd done the squad story. So we'd reported that Rashford wasn't in the squad. But of course, when the players arrive at the stadium and they have to walk behind the goal at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, so you can see them coming into the ground and before going down the tunnel, and no Rashford confirmation, and team drops. And on the WhatsApp group that us journalists are in, that United oversee and provide us with some information on certain matters. The first thing that came in there after the team and the squad was confirmed was that Matthias de Ligt isn't here because he's unwell. Even though all the attention was on, is Garnacho going to be there? Is Rashford going to be there? Now, of course, we knew Garnacho was there, and we knew Rashford wasn't there because we'd done the story the previous day. But for United to still, decide to home in on Matthias de Ligt as the team news was quite amusing. And I think it was Tyrone who's with me at the game who responded, anything on Rashford, almost like half jokingly. But I think we knew by that point that Garnacho had gone in one direction, Rashford had gone in the other direction a week after that that game in Pilsen. And I remember that moment when Rashford was substituted, and I was in Pilsen with United probably 1-0 down, I think, at the time as well. And I noticed just the distance between him and Amorim when Rashford came off, and how far away Amorim was because he was issuing some instructions. And it was distance, not just in the literal sense, but also figuratively as well. And I thought, that's not a good look. And I said about it at the time, and I was sat next to Neil Custers, the son. He said, "Oh, are you going to do anything with that at all?" And I said, "Well, it feels quite relevant." And then when Joshua Zirkzee and Tyrone Marshall were substituted, Amrim almost not made a point, but he was even more. He wanted to make more of a show of acknowledging them coming off, and I thought, well, this is relevant now, in that there's this chasm, if you like, between Amorim and Rashford, about a month into their working relationship, if that. Probably not even a month, given that Amorim took charge of training for the first time. Would it have been on 18th of November, I think, because of the November internationals? So not even a month in working relationship, and there's already this very significant and visible distance between them after Rashford's been brought off with United 1-0 down away to Victoria Pilsen. And then, of course, a couple of days later, he's told, "You're not getting in the squad for City because I don't like your attitude." And he's not played for United since he came off that night in Pilsen, which again is a real shame for a player, given how ardent the bond was between him and the supporters at the very start of his professional United career, when he got those goals against Midtjylland and Arsenal in February 2016. But over the past 2 or 3 years, there have been there have been issues there, undeniable issues, and Ten Hag read him the right act, and I think by and large dealt with Rashford quite well. And ideally for him, I think if he had the firepower and attack, he would have got rid of Rashford. He probably would have sent him out on loan midway through the 23-24 season, after what happened in Belfast in particular. But he didn't feel that he had the wherewithal to do it, because United's attack was so not depleted, but that was a season they ended with a minus goal difference, and he didn't have the manpower to be able to say, right, yeah, get rid of him. Whereas with Cristiano Ronaldo, I mean, Ronaldo effectively, forced his exit. He filed for divorce with that interview he did with Talk TV, and it was also before the January transfer window. So that did give United one, he had to go anyway after saying what he did, but also there was a transfer window coming up, which meant that they could do something, even though that something was Wout Weghorst coming in. They weren't in as powerful a position as when Rashford headed off to Belfast days before their season resumed against Newport County in the FA Cup. And of course, with the state of play at the moment, we're in a transfer window, and we fully expect, and United fully expect and hope, that Rashford and Garnacho will be among their outgoings.
It's a very nice segue, that, Samuel, into the next point I was going to raise about the prospect of these two leaving. You've done the stories already this summer about how Rashford's a priority sale, Garnacho they're open to letting go at the right price. But on Rashford, you did a story on Friday, I think it was, where you outlined that maybe a sale may not be so simple to get done. United not expecting many teams to be able to meet their demands for him of about £40 million. A loan deal seems like it could be the most likely exit route. Barcelona now looking at Nico Williams as an alternative winger, and Barcelona has obviously been a club that has appealed to Marcus Rashford for a long time. He wants Champions League football. So getting him off the books might not be so simple. Garnacho maybe a little easier, but again, it's not going to be a straightforward task.
I don't know if you remember that scene in the Tottenham All or Nothing documentary on Amazon, where Danny Rose goes to Daniel Levy, anything from Milan, and Daniel Levy just about suppresses his laughter and said, "Like, Milan's a no-go at the moment." And it was only Newcastle that were in for him at the time, and Newcastle at the time were managed by Steve Bruce. It was pre-Saudi takeover. They were always in the bottom half of the table. It was not as desirable a club, or enticing as enticing a destination as it is now. One, of course, that offers Champions League football. And that reminded me of that with Rashford essentially fluttering his eyelashes at Barcelona over the weekend. I mean, if I had the choice between Nico Williams and Marcus Rashford, it would be Nico Williams in a heartbeat every day of the week. There would be nothing that would make me waver on the choice between those two. And where Rashford, he's almost set out this very specific criteria, and he may have to budge on it depending on what comes up. But he doesn't want to. He's not shown any interest in taking an offer from the Saudi Pro League or a Turkish club, given the tax incentives of playing in Turkey. He doesn't want to play in London or move to London either, but he wants to play in the Champions League. And when you consider that and you whittle that list down, and then you whittle down the list of clubs who could realistically afford him, the clubs who would actually need him, the clubs who would actually want him, you're talking about a handful of clubs. And that was probably the issue that it certainly would have been the issue if United looked to sell him last year, which they weren't really actively looking to do that, and it was never going to happen. He was unsellable a year after getting a contract worth 325 grand a week, and that's of course still the other issue that United have and clubs would have, in that he's, as far as I'm aware, he's not prepared to take a pay cut, and there are very few footballers who are prepared to take a pay cut these days. And the one who I was told is actually Anthony, but let's face it, if he's going to get a permanent move from United in the summer, he's not going to be able to earn 150 grand a week, which is what he's on now at United, with his the 25% reduction hit by not being in the Champions League. So again, that's bad. That's the bad business that United did in 2022. Not only did they part with more than 80 million pounds for him, they put him on 200 grand a week, because you pay that money for a player, they need a salary to reflect it, and that's my understanding of it. But he's apparently prepared to take a 30% pay cut, but still that's 120 grand a week. And let's face it, he's going to be playing on the continent if he is to get a move, unless he's going to go down the Saudi route. There are a handful of clubs that would be able to afford that, even if they wanted Anthony. And it's unclear how many actually truly do want Anthony, because the majority of, if we're talking La Liga, I mean, Real Betis would love him, but they can't afford him, which is a problem for United. And that's a similar problem that they have with Rashford. And these are problems of their own making. They've signed these players for daft fees, or they've put them on daft contracts. And with the Rashford one, I do somewhat sympathise with them, because if they hadn't have given him a new contract, then he'd have just left for free, and everyone would have said, why the hell are they letting go their best player or their top goal scorer of the last two seasons? Because the contract would have run out in 2024. I think it was, sorry. His previous deal was running out in 2024. There's no way, had his contract say he didn't sign that contract in July 2023, if he's going into the 23-24 season, there's no way he has as bad a season as he did have if he's still got contract negotiations going on in the background. We've seen it happen so often that a player falls to pieces, or they just don't look as interested after they've got a new contract. They get comfortable. But if those discussions were still ongoing, I fully expect that Rashford would have had possibly a decent 23-24 campaign. But I think we could see what was going on. He has his career best season in the midst of contract negotiations, and of course that strengthened his hand. But United, could they have said, look, this is our version of events. This is the way we look at it. That could have antagonised the player, could antagonise his representatives. Sometimes it is, they couldn't have foreseen Rashford becoming as bad as he was in Ten Hag's second season, and his form falling off the edge of a cliff. But again, it is something to be mindful of in the future. That said, Garnacho, when he got his contract in 2023, I thought he was terrific in the 23-24 season. I think he should have won the Smack Busby Player of the Year award. Bruno Fernandes did win that award last season after getting a contract in the summer. And let's face it, the first half of last season, he was actually pretty bad. but second half of the season, he was tremendous. He rarely had a bad game.
Yeah, I was just going to reference Bruno Fernandes myself, actually, in the way that he tailed off a little bit after getting that new contract. But as you said there, Samuel, he did pick up in the second half of the campaign. But as we've already said, Anthony, they want to sell. Rashford, they want to sell. Garnacho, they want to sell. The one man we've not mentioned in this podcast so far is another one they want to get off the books, which is Jadon Sancho. You did a piece on him over the on Friday, in fact. And again, he's another one that's had outbursts on social media in the past. Napoli reportedly keen on him. The Chelsea deal not happening now. Napoli's sporting director coming out last night and saying the wages are going to be an obstacle for them. It could be a familiar theme for this for United. For quite a few players, they do want to shift this summer.
Again, another player who, you look at his profile back in summer of 2021, where he was an England international. He was in the England squad at the Euros. Borussia Dortmund, you know, a big club in Europe, big club in Germany, second biggest club in Germany. Came through the Manchester City academy. I think his fee at United was £72.9 million. So it's a guarantee that that player, especially as a winger as well, their salary is going to be their weekly salary is going to be in six figures. Should it have been around 250 grand a week? No, but United had Ed Woodward negotiating deals still, and yeah, we don't need to get into why Ed Woodward was bad at his job at Manchester United, but again, that's another problem of their own making, and footballers very rarely take a pay cut. If Harry Maguire had agreed to take a pay cut, he'd have joined West Ham United in August 2023, and he wouldn't have been the hero of the hour against Lyon in April, or got all those other crucial goals, or indeed played as well as he has done in the past two seasons for Manchester United. He'd have been at West Ham, and that's why it's such a rarity with a player in this day and age to take a pay cut, unless they're in a position where they've run down their contract or they're winding down at the end of their career. But it's, I think in the case of Sancho, you can fairly say like the arrogance is just untrue there, really. When you look at his last 4 years, and I remember during that European Championship campaign in 2021 being told that his training form was so poor that that was why he wasn't getting minutes, because I think certainly during those early group games where England were not exactly setting the world alight or setting the pulses racing with their performances against, was it Croatia, Scotland, and the Czech Republic? I think it was 2-1-0 wins and a goalless draw. And Sancho barely got a look in, and he was quite a popular player because of what he'd done at Dortmund. He was a winger, exciting player, and a lot of people were asking like, why is he not getting a look in? And I did the story at the time that his training form had essentially prevented him from getting minutes. And then after the deal with United was announced, about halfway through that tournament, he did get a look in the team, and Gareth Southgate actually confirmed the story in an interview he did with Gabriel Clark, where he said, like, we've noticed a big difference in his training form since the United deal got done. And I'd been told some things about Sancho, not specifically training form, but things that made me think, I don't think United should actually be going for this player. And it still felt inevitable that that he was going to end up back at England. Not only that, he was going to end up at Manchester United, and United almost felt like obliged to sign this player on that money. And it's not worked. He's had what, maybe 2.5 good months in his entire time at United. I would say he actually played quite well after he came back into the team, after having 3 months out of the season to get fit and sort himself out. He had a decent period under Ralph Rangnick as well. But that's what I mean. This is how bad he has been at Manchester United. He's been there for 4 years almost, and you really could reduce his effective, maybe at the start of Ten Hag's first season as well. We got a couple of important goals, but I think his performance level was actually quite poor during those games. So you are essentially, it is really 2.5 good months out of 4 years. at Manchester United, and this guy doesn't want to take a pay cut. Oh, yeah, and by the way, Chelsea didn't want to sign him permanently as well. In fact, Chelsea paid not to sign him. That's how far his stock has fallen, and he's reluctant to take a pay cut. Well, you know, good luck if, say, he is still, on United's books, but via some loan deal after the summer transfer window closes, and he ends up being a free agent in a year's time. I would be gobsmacked if anybody was prepared to pay him a quarter of a million a week, unless somehow he becomes the player he was at Dortmund next season. But wherever that may be, it certainly won't be at United, and it cannot be at United either.
No, one way or another, there has got to be an exit, however they can fashion it. But in terms of incoming, Samuel, it's been pretty quiet. We mentioned last week that we all expected it to pick up once we hit July next week. But you've done the story this morning that United are streamlining their scouting system with Christopher Vell sort of overseeing a few changes. Seems like another positive step in the club's recruitment strategy on that front. I think, as I've said, once we hit July, things should start moving a little bit quicker, because I think getting the Cunha deal done so early, it's just raised excitement levels and expectation levels a little bit. But as we know, the market doesn't work like that. You can't get everything done in 5 minutes.
No, and there is a waiting game, and there is this new deadline of June 30th, and the PSR ramifications of that, and why that is a factor in clubs waiting, sometimes deliberately waiting until July to do a deal, so that it helps them balance the books, and you enter a new financial year from July the 1st. But the scouting, the streamlining of the scouting network is very interesting, because it used to be so bloated. It used to be in excess of about 100, to the point that Manchester United scouts were bumping into each other at the same game to watch the same player, at which point you think, well, why the hell are two of them there? And I mean, when I was told that it was down to 10 scouts, I thought, could it really be that few? But I've gone through it with a pretty fine tooth comb this morning, and I've come back with literally 10 listed scouts under employment by Manchester United at first team level. The caveat is that there will be a lot of recruitment analysts, and this is following the trend of some clubs. I mean, Brighton, probably the most memorable example, they've pretty much got rid of all of their scouts in favour of data analysis and recruitment analysts, because, I mean, Brighton in particular have been, I mean, they are probably best in class at recruitment. They are recruiting at a low level from the elite teams in the Premier League, which obviously plays into their hands. But nevertheless, the signings that they've made over several years, certainly since they got promoted to the Premier League in 2017, are phenomenal. You look at the caliber of players they bought, and how brilliant they've become at Brighton, how well they've done after leaving Brighton. Recent years, a couple of examples obviously would be Moises Caicedo and Alexis McAllister. They have become better players at Liverpool and Chelsea. But the Brighton owner, Tony Bloom, swears by this bespoke data analysis that Brighton have. And of course, Jim Ratcliffe complained midway through last season that United was still stuck in the last century on data analysis, which was a gross exaggeration. I mean, they had their own head of data science that was hired by John Murtough and Dominic Jordan. Murtough was a big advocate of data-led recruitment, but ultimately it was all undermined by them just going to the Eredivisie and seeing who'd played for Ajax and who'd worked for Eric, and just signing pretty much anyone who was available there. I mean, I thought again at the weekend, you could almost compile a starting 11 of Dutch players or Dutch schooled players who Ten Hag wanted and didn't sign. Like, I remember Bart Verbruggen was looked at, Serginho Dest, Jeremy Frimpong, Frankie de Jong, obviously most infamously. Brian Brobby was another one. He liked the look of Xavi Simons. I'm probably forgetting one or two. Listeners
Mohamed Kudus was
probably.
another one.
He liked Kudus. I don't
Yeah,
know if they ever properly went for him, or
I think
he
he was
was
on the
ever
radar
under
at one point, wasn't
consideration.
he?
But yeah, but I mean, that reflected badly on Ten Hag. There was a very good left-footed winger at Ajax. It just wasn't Anthony. It was Mohamed Kudus, and West Ham had the foresight to see that and sign him instead of Anthony. Um, so I mean, Murta and Jordan, they left within the first 5 months of Ratcliffe's minority stakeholding being confirmed. So that's what Ratcliffe thought of them and thought of the setup at United, and Vivell has gone in there and he's been empowered really to oversee the scouting network. Jason Wilcox, of course, is now the director of football. This is his first proper summer overseeing recruitment in terms of the calendar year. He's had a pretty good start, I would say, mainly with the Aiden Heaven deal, even though Heaven's not played too often for United. When he has played, he's been excellent. Dorgu, patchy, but he is a potential signing. He's only 20, he's quite raw. You can see, I think in a year's time, there's a very high probability that United will be in the market for a left winger, because Luke Shaw, hopefully for them, if he's still at the club at that time, hopefully for them should be easier to shift. You've got Amas and Dorgu, who are quite raw options there at the moment. I think they'll want a specialist there in a year's time to try and get a more rounded first team, if that's at all possible. I think that would be pretty sensible. But Dorgu has become an important player pretty much almost immediately after he joined the club. I think he started in 18 out of 23 games, and he'll have been rested, I imagine, for a couple of those games off the top of my head. And of course, he was suspended for 3 after his red card against Ipswich Town. So, and of course, with the Cunha deal, I mean, we've not seen Cunha play yet for United, but we've seen Cunha play in the Premier League, and he's a joy to watch. He's a brilliant player, and hopefully, for United's sake, he can transmit the form he showed at Molineux for Wolves to Old Trafford next season.
And hopefully, maybe Brian Mbeumo will join him as well. That obviously is still rumbling on in the background, and we'll see what happens on that front. But I would say, Samuel, for all the faults that INEOS have overseen since they arrived on the scene, the recruitment model has improved for the best. There's been a few questionable calls last summer, Joshua Zirkzee, for example, but the positives outweigh the negatives on recruitment, I would say, so far.
Yeah, again, at the risk of bringing up your or Stephen's infamous grading of players, another one I thought that he got wrong was De Ligt. And look, some of us interviewed De Ligt at the end of the post-season tour, and he's a fascinating talker. And I actually think before his injury, he'd found form and he was getting better, and he had some good games. I remember Leicester away. A little bit earlier than that, probably the high point of the season would have been Arsenal away in the FA Cup. I thought he played very well, even though Harry Maguire felt more of the story that day if you're looking at centre-backs, and what was overall a very good and gutsy Manchester United performance. But De Ligt, I don't think he didn't have a good season. Ugarte didn't have a good season. Zirkzee clawed back a little bit of credit, but of course was missing for pretty much the entirety of the run-in. He was rushed back for the Europa League final, which didn't reflect. That wasn't a reflection on. I think one, it was a reflection on United's desperation, and also on how bad Rasmus Højlund had been as well. They needed another senior striker as an option, where obviously Chido Obi was ineligible and hadn't been included in the Europa League squad. Lenny Yoro started to show in the run-in why he should be a good Manchester United player, and why nobody will ever be talking about the pretty the eyebrow-raising fee that they ended up paying for him. Deal agreed for up to 70 million euros with Lille. And Nusa Mazraoui did have a good season. He was certainly there were a handful of players who could come away from that season and say, I think I've done well. I think I've had quite a decent or a good season. Fernandes, Ahmad, Harry Maguire, and I'd probably say the other one was Nusa Mazraoui. So it's kind of almost 50-50, I think, in terms of the recruitment so far, if you're adding Dorgu and Heaven as well. I don't think anyone's been an outright hit, you can say. But it's not as simple, excuse me, as saying who's been a hit, who's been a miss. It's far more nuanced than that. And as I said, I think it's the hit rate certainly in the transfer market has improved under INEOS, but they still need some. I think with Cunha and Mbeumo, they're going after Premier League pedigree, and that's exactly what they need to do.
Most definitely. And on that positive note, we will mark the end of this episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever else you may get your podcasts from. Also, make sure to leave a like and maybe a comment as well. We'll be back again soon with another episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show. So have a great week. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.